Welcome back to another episode of everyone's favourite and the most renowned news chat that's out there.
World-renowned.
World-renowned, yes. Thank you, J-Law. I'm Georgie Tunney.
And I'm James Law.
And this is Flash Drive. J-Law, what a week.
Well, we're here in Sydney, right? And
yeah.
As we're recording this, it feels like the rain is bearing down on us from all angles. And also I feel like it's reflecting the global mood, just the relentless misery.
I have to say, yes, it is indicative of the relentless misery, because I think it's fair to say that I'm kind of done with 2022. I know we're 3 months in, but it's been pretty rubbish.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to say goodbye. And look, we will be diving into all the latest talking points and bring you the latest news from what's going on with the Ukrainian conflict. We're going to look at the situation as it stands with the floods in Queensland and New South Wales. But first, we're kicking it off with the news that shocked the world.
Australia awoke this morning to the devastating news of the passing of one of our favourite sons, Shane Keith Warne. Warnie, as he was known to many people, tragically passed away overnight in Thailand, Australian time, after suffering a heart attack.
See what I mean? Absolute rubbish so far, 2022. The death of Shane Warne, it was the news that completely shocked me. I know it shocked a whole lot of people too. It was one of those moments, J-Law, which was, where were you when? Type thing. What was your reaction?
Well, at first I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
And I think that most Australians didn't believe it when they first heard it. He was only 52, so young. But yeah, it broke late on Friday night, early Saturday morning. And luckily I was up because we had to put it on flash. And one of my colleagues pinged it through on the phone. I was like, surely you're mistaken.
Yes.
But then we verified it and was like, whoa, this is huge. And and the next day I remember I was in a cafe and it was just all that anyone was talking about, overhearing it in other tables and the barista and all that sort of stuff. It just dominated what everyone was thinking about. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what it was like for me as well, because I woke up to the news on Saturday morning and it was my partner who sort of rolled over and said, oh my God, Shane Warne's died. And my first thought was, he's had a stroke. My partner has had a stroke and misremembered Rod Marsh's name, because we just had the really tragic death as well of Rod Marsh, who died so suddenly from a heart attack.
The same day pretty much.
Yeah, another cricketing legend. And I was thinking to myself, Shane Warne can't be dead, because I remember reading a tweet of him paying tribute to Rod Marsh. So that just can't be. And it was a similar feeling that, you're right, has really been felt not only around the world, but especially within the tight-knit cricketing community of Australia. This was how the former cricket captain, Alan Border, summed things up.
I thought I was still dreaming. I just could not comprehend what was going on. And even right now, I'm expecting to wake up and it's just a bad dream. But sadly, it's not the case. And
it's not a bad dream, it's reality. This is happening. And J-Law, the impact of Shane Warne, if we can look at that, it's now been a few days before we had the confirmed news. The impact of him on the game of cricket, he completely changed it. There's absolutely no denying that. And it's something that his teammates have been reflecting on fondly, but sadly this week too. And another former Australian captain, Ricky Ponting, summed it up as well, because that glittering team that Shane Warne really helped build from the 90s and the noughties, if they were touring around the country having cricket clinics and things like that, there was only one player that these kids wanted to be.
Every young kid in Australia wanted to be Shane Warne and wanted to bowl leg spin. So, yeah.
Oh, Ricky's voice for me, because I grew up watching cricket. I grew up watching so much sport, but particularly cricket and the Australian summer of cricket. And now to see players that I idolised growing up getting so emotional, it makes me emotional. I get the tears, I get choked up, and just thinking about what Shane Warne meant to me, let alone anyone who actually knew him and knew him well and loved him like his family, because he's going to have an impact he's had an impact on Australian culture more than anything.
Yeah. Well, because, so there's his cricket, but there's also his personality, right?
Yeah.
And the way that he lived his life so honestly, very honest about the times he stuffed up, you know, and, you know, there's been a lot of scandals that have followed him throughout his life. But he was always very honest and upfront about mistakes he'd made, and just that incredible skill around leg spinning, which, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know better than me, but it wasn't a super fashionable way to bowl until he brought it back, right?
Yeah, very, very much so. It was kind of a dying art then, and then Shane Warne took it upon himself, really, and he just trained and trained and trained. And you hear interviews now looking back on him talking about how he became one of the greatest leg spinners of all time, and the dedication and the time and the repetition that took. Just him playing with a cricket ball in his fingers, running it around, trying to flip the ball. Like, it's quite remarkable, his skill and what he was able to do to change cricket. But he was a larger-than-life character, and I think, does that mean... I think we've had the discussion this week about how to cover the death of someone like Shane Warne, who is such a public figure, who is such a well-loved figure, and the interest that generates. Because a lot of the time, the details around someone's death, when it is a sudden death, a shocking death, it almost seems quite macabre, but they're the details that everyone's interested in. Yeah.
Well, look, to be honest with you, we had a story this week that was reflecting some of the details about when his body was found. And, you know, it was reported and that there were bloodstains found near his body, and that was like quite a confronting detail. But it was one that people really wanted to know about, because I think it was really hard to believe.
Yeah.
You know, I think people, you know, and some friends of mine were saying, oh, this feels a bit sus. We know now it wasn't. You know, the autopsy has confirmed that it was natural causes, so nothing suspicious at all. But I think that people just didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
They'd prefer to believe in some kind of foul play than the reality of what happened. So, but look, it is difficult to cover. You've got to strike the balance between giving people the information that they want and, you don't want to go too far and make it too macabre. Yeah.
Do you think we'll see another sporting figure like Shane Warne, someone who completely dominates conversation, both when he was alive and now, sadly, in his passing, dominates the conversation for better or worse? People love to hate him. People love him. People think that they have a right to him in a way as well. I think looking back on some of those interviews, watching the 7:30 one, ABC 7:30 interview, Lee Sales with Shane with him, it's really quite poignant now looking back, but he is someone who was just so famous, and he himself summed it up best.
Most people, even if they don't like cricket or whatever, they have an opinion about me. Good, bad, whatever it might be, even if they don't like me, they still talk about me. In that interview, he also said that whenever he was out and about, people would be like, Warnie, come over here, like, have a beer with me, have a shot with me. And he always did so.
Yeah.
He felt obliged to do so.
Because like he had to live up to this, creations persona that he had created that a lot of the time people had put upon him, I think. Yeah.
But I guess that's it. Like, well, I mean, if I was at the pub and Warnie was there, I'd probably do the same thing. Like, that is not like an opportunity you want to let pass, especially if he's up for it.
Yeah.
So I get it. But, yeah, I mean, the other thing that I think about is like going back to like his incredible skill. It was always amazing to hear him talk about the game as well. So like his contribution to the game didn't end when he retired playing.
Not at all.
He was a great commentator, a great sort of cricket analyst, still very much involved in the game, interested in using his platform to talk about how to build up the game and get the new players through the sort of lower ranks and up through to Test cricket. So his impact was pretty large, and then the other thing I reflect on is like just with his spin bowling skill. Like I think back to when you'd be in high school or whatever and play cricket, and that's what everyone was trying to do. And to terrible results. Trying to spin the ball. It's like you don't have the skill.
I remember picking up a tennis ball. So already.
You're in
She's
trouble.
behind. I'm in trouble. It's not a cricket ball. It doesn't have a seam. But I'm there being like, I can do this. And I remember trying to pull off the flipper.
Yeah.
And all I remember was just I'd seen Shane Warne do it so many times. It comes out the back of the hand. You flick
Easy.
it up right with the list. Just
Yeah.
a little flick of the wrist and I've got this. And I remember with my tennis ball trying to do that. And a couple of times it spun because it's a tennis ball. And I thought, hang on a second. Am I a prodigy? No was the answer. No was the answer. Not a child prodigy. But that was obviously a scene that had not only taken place in my household, but so many households, not only in Australia, but around the world, because that I think is key to point out too. The world is mourning him because cricket is such a global sport. So especially, India, Pakistan, the tributes that we've seen coming out of there, England, it's been beautiful, but so sad that this has happened.
Indeed, and even some of his biggest rivals from some of the countries around India and places like that have paid tribute to him because they respected him so much. Yeah, that was good to see.
Vale, Shane Warne.
Vale, one of the best.
I just love that sound. When I just think back to the summer of cricket and the soundtrack can just be summed up with Adam Gilchrist saying, "Bowling, Shane."
Bowling. Incredible.
All right, time to head to what else has been happening in the news. And I feel like the question is more what hasn't been happening in the news, but let's focus on what's going on in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland, because residents there have been united really this week in their stinging criticism directed towards authorities, mainly the New South Wales government, over the response to the deadly floods that devastated so many regions last week. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet says that he's heard all that condemnation and that the official response has actually not been good enough.
Many people, there's a sense of anger. Many people have felt that they've been abandoned, and that's just a terrible thing. And I know from the SES and the ADF that people are doing everything they could to get supplies in, but ultimately when we get through all of this, and there's obviously a major task ahead of us now, there'll need to be a review in relation to in relation to ensuring that that doesn't happen again. I don't want anyone, regardless of how unprecedented a flood or a fire is, to ever feel like that. And I certainly felt that yesterday with many, many people.
A terrible thing, but it seems to be ongoing, seems to be happening. Have we seen a systemic failure here, do you think?
I think so. Where you've got a situation where people are crowdfunding helicopters.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And, Dominic Perrottet and also the federal government have been coming out, and their main line has been, this is unprecedented. We were caught unprepared.
Yeah. How can you plan for something that we've never seen?
Something this catastrophic.
Yeah.
But I think that people are starting not to buy that argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been told for years and years and years and years that these sort of events are going to be more common.
Yes.
And it feels like, it's important when you're talking about climate change not to cherry pick events.
Mm-hmm.
But it does feel like, we're copping it all the time from all angles. And we need to, as a nation, think about how we're going to deal with these kind of events in a better way, because they're not going to stop.
Nope.
Not when we've got these kind of weak climate change policies and it's not just Australia, but the world can't seem to get it together on this front. Australia's going to cop it, and there's going to be more bushfires, there's going to be more droughts, there's going to be more catastrophic floods like this, and we're not prepared.
Another great news point for us. Not prepared. Not wonderful. Prepared. We love these good news stories. But talking about things being unprecedented, if we are going to use a lot of the authorities speak and how unprecedented this event is, this flooding event is, I think it's unprecedented in some ways, the reaction and just the ferocity of that reaction from residents, particularly in Lismore, northern New South Wales, and just how loud their condemnation has been, because we are now, a week since the deadly floodwaters ravaged those towns. And in a lot of places, there is still accessibility issues, yes, but for it to fall upon regular everyday Joe rather than highly skilled ADF troop, is, I think, what people are furious about, and they just can't quite understand, because there has been a little bit of time now since, you know, we saw houses inundated. We saw the tinny army going out there and trying to save lives and saving lives. And I think that's been one of the most frustrating things for all of those people, because if it wasn't for the volunteers, if it wasn't for that good old Australian spirit, look after your neighbour, so many more people would have died.
Well, that's it. You know, and remember that the SES is sort of the hero a lot of the time with these, and that's a volunteer organisation.
Yes.
I wonder whether it is right for us to be always relying or calling for the ADF when these kind of things happen. Like, remember that this is not what the ADF is for.
No.
They're not for emergency support. They're here to protect us in a national security sense. But we're calling on them all the time for, like, you know, when COVID got into aged care, for the vaccine rollout. Now we're calling on them for flooding assistance. You know, like, is it time for us to have some different kind of organisation that works like an army but isn't the army? What do you think?
I think it is, just because the situation is so dire and the forecast is so dire for what's to come. So I think that there needs to be a plan. People say you can't plan for these things. There has to be some kind of plan. You know, Peter Dutton this week, the Defence Minister, has said that resources were starting to be put into place because the forecast was so bad and predictions were made that it was going to be really, really bad. However, that's now proved to be pretty ineffective when you see, you know, the catastrophic conditions that so many people are still living through and dealing with. So it's about learning from this now and taking practical measures to at least try for it not to happen again. So I think that there does need to be a separate branch that's sole job is that, because we are going to be seeing it so more often.
Yeah, I think so too.
We know national security is going to be a major factor when it comes to the federal election, and this has only been heightened once again by the Ukrainian conflict, the awful scenes that we are seeing across the world in Eastern Europe. The fighting has entered a second week. The situation is horrific for the Ukrainians who are trapped there. Humanitarian corridors trying to evacuate those citizens from the most besieged cities continuously keep failing. Ceasefires are being breached, and at the moment, Russia is just ploughing on, trying to capture Kyiv. At the time that we are recording this, Kyiv remains a Ukrainian city and the Ukrainian capital. But, Jayla, where are we at right now with this? Because I think we're into the second week. It's obvious that it could probably extend for months, this conflict now. Diplomacy has obviously failed. So where to from here?
Well, yeah, I think that it's inevitable it will last for months, because, you know, Russia came out overnight and really spelt out what its terms would be for it to stop continuing with this invasion, or its military operation, as they like to call it. They had 4 demands that I think are quite interesting. They want Ukraine to cease military action, which is interesting because it makes out as if Ukraine started this, not them.
Yes, which is also ties into, because I know that the Russian ambassador at the UN addressed the Security Council this morning too and said that the Ukrainians were shelling themselves. Unsubstantiated.
Well, yeah. Bald-faced lie is another way.
That's another way you could put it. Yeah, yep.
So that's number one. Number 2, to change its constitution to become a neutral country. Number 3, acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory.
Interesting.
And number 4, recognise the 2 eastern Ukrainian regions as independent.
Okay.
So they're like quite substantial demands.
Yes.
Ukraine obviously is not interested in that. And so these are the things that are making the ceasefires fall over. And I can't see how, you know, Russia's going to concede any of those points if that's what the bar it's setting to stop the onslaught.
No, and you'd have to say that none of those points are going to be facilitated while President Volodymyr Zelensky's alive.
Indeed.
Or in power.
Yeah, and we sort of saw him back in his office for the first time today, which was cool to see, because he's been in bunkers, he's been in hidden locations. It sort of shows his growing confidence. I think he knows that he's winning the media war. I think he knows he's got nations behind him. So it's interesting to see him continue to become more confident and assertive. And, his media management has actually been quite masterful. He's been pulling in some of these foreign correspondents who've been stationed in the cities and having one-on-one interviews with them, having press conferences, doing, videos straight onto social media.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty powerful.
Been really powerful. And you talk about the media war. I think it's interesting to note that TikTok has now decided that it is going to stop Russian videos being uploaded from Russia, which is huge because that platform has been a giant and one of the main sources of the spread of misinformation, disinformation surrounding this particular conflict. But it's also interesting because TikTok itself is a Chinese company. And we know that China has really not taken a stance, I guess, is the fairest way to put it when it comes to Russia. They have refused to denounce their actions, but they've also refused to say that they are full out in support of President Putin. But that to me was another interesting development this week within the confines of the conflict.
That is interesting. And also I was reading about how, Russia generally, like it has state media, but it also had a smattering of independent media outlets, ones that were critical of Putin's regime, and they were until now allowed to do their work.
Yeah.
No longer.
Not now.
So, in terms of the media war, they're being shut down, or oftentimes they're voluntarily doing so, knowing it's no longer safe. So that's an interesting dynamic as well.
Well, it brings us to this concept right now, or this theory of a new global superpower that the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has actually been pretty strong on over the last week, saying that there is this rise, the arc of autocracy, and just how dangerous that is for liberal Western democracy. This was him speaking to the Lowy Institute earlier this week.
He planned this a long time ago, and he was absolutely determined to follow it through. And he went and told China he was going to do it by the reports that we see very clearly. And this is quite chilling. And so now we hear the theories, it's just he's all gone mad. No, he hasn't. He's an autocrat, and he's following through on his plans. And for all of us in the West and more broadly, I think we need to understand that autocrats don't play by the same rules as the rest of us.
I think Morrison's been really strong on this. He's clearly, I think for the Liberals, national security is a strength for them.
Yes.
And I think it's been interesting to hear him go quite hard on this. There's a history of this. Remember Abbott threatening to shirt front Putin?
Oh, yes.
That was a fun phrase.
I'd actually forgotten that.
Yeah.
Bring it back. Bring back the shirt front. Yeah,
that's
okay.
it. So I think that the shirt front is good politics. But yeah, he's been quite strong about this. He's been quite strong at calling on China to more strongly denounce Russia. I think what he's saying is bang on.
So for Scott Morrison, I think the key here is setting this up as a good versus bad, us versus them, the West and the Democrats, the democratic countries of the Western world versus the autocrats, and positioning that as the poorer version of society, that is not what we should be wanting, that is not what should be aiming, because everything will just end in violence. And I think he's been pretty successful doing that. The question is just what the West then can do to combat it. Because right now we're seeing, some of the heaviest sanctions that have ever been introduced, placed upon Russia. Really, Russia is as isolated as it could be in a geopolitical sense, discounting, China, India, other countries who have made their stance neutral in regards to this. But is it going to have an effect? Like, will it actually change the course of this conflict? I don't think that it will.
No, because I think that, Russia still has a lot of firepower that it hasn't used yet. There's been a lot of tactical mistakes they've made, but, they've still got hundreds of thousands of extra troops and then reservists on top of that they can call on if they need them. And if they've come this far, there's nowhere they're just going to retreat. They have to see this through, and they've got the manpower to do it.
All right, it's that time of the podcast. Quick shout out to the platform Flash, for which we both work. J-Law, what can we be watching on Flash this week?
The thing that I would point people to is a really good interview that Rob Crash Craddock had with Shane Warne before his death. It's called Cricket Legends Shane Warne. It's a really detailed interview about his whole cricketing career, exactly what drives him, what he thinks about the game today, and it's still really relevant today. And his personality comes through in the way that everyone remembers. So I think a lot of people will appreciate watching that.
My brain just went, J-Law's off his head. Shane Warne's not dead. So I'm still coming to terms with it. So maybe that will be some therapeutic viewing for myself.
I think that's healthy.
All right, we're going to be back next week, guys. We hope there may be some glimmer of good news.
We promised good news last week. We did not deliver.
I mean, extenuating circumstances, guys. I'm sorry we did not deliver. But look, we're going to try again next week to find something positive to talk about. Until then, I'm just going to be going down so many rabbit holes watching highlights of Warnie. See you next week.
Please send me some links. See you later.
Remember, if you enjoy the news like ourselves and this podcast, Flash Drive, you want to learn more about Flash, you can sign up at flashnews.com.au. Flash lets you stream more than 25 news channels in the one place. And at the moment, new customers get 14 days free, which is pretty bloody cool. Start streaming your news today.